Welcome to the Branching Out podcast. I'm Celine Whitetail.
And I'm Gull the Cactus. This is Branching Out, the podcast where we grow in knowledge together. This week, our topic is philosophy. Plato, specifically. This is where I give the background, and I don't know why I paused, but I did.
It's
Okay,
okay.
so...
You can edit it in post or keep it in for the fun.
or keep it in. Yeah. Starting out, philosophy is a word with Greek origins. Or maybe Latin. I don't really know. Doesn't matter. They're basically the same. Anyway, philosophy is composed of two like sub-words, and it's philia, which is the love of, and Sophia, which is wisdom. So it's literally the love of wisdom and seeking out and desire for wisdom. So that's actually a concept that's going to come back later. So I just wanted to, mention it at the top. But when people talk about philosophy, I think the image that comes to mind is probably Socrates and his peers, sitting around, laying on couches in togas, debating while drinking wine, and there are no women around. And there's a very good, and the reason I say that is there's a very good reason for that, for the time period. And it is something that gets addressed in Symposium, which is part of what I'm going to be talking about today. Plato was a Greek philosopher born in 427 BC and died in 348 BC, so kind of a long time ago. He was the student of Socrates and the teacher of Aristotle, who famously taught Alexander the Great. And now that I say that, I'm like, is that even true? Or am I just making that up? If I made that up and I'm wrong, you can tell me in the comments, but that's okay, because part of learning is being wrong sometimes. Plato used in his dialogues, we have come to know as the Socratic method. There's a lot of like buzzwords for philosophy and like lawyer stuff that basically had their origins with Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So I'm just kind of like hitting all the high level ones here. But the Socratic method was a like question and answer format kind of thing that when you're teaching and discussing philosophy, that involves you leading your dialogue partner or partners into revealing their own contradictions and fallacies in their arguments by asking them questions and requesting that they explain themselves rather than pointing out the faults in their arguments yourself. So basically it's like, can you explain X, Y, or Z about what you talked about? And then they basically dig themselves in a hole and like realize that they have contradictions in their argument. But anyway, Plato was one of the most influential philosophers in the school of Athens and like also like in human history. This is very interesting as someone who minored in history in undergrad. It's thought that his entire body of work, philosophical work, he might have also written some poetry or plays that didn't persist to the present day, but his entire body of philosophical work is believed to have survived intact, unlike almost all of his contemporaries, which is kind of marvelous. That's not the word I wanted. What was the astonishing is the word I wanted, which is not at all close to it's kind of a marvel when you think about it, because it's so old, and the way that we were able to preserve writing was not really efficient until 1453, which is when the printing press came into popular use. That was when really things were able to be copied and distributed and translated into different languages and basically much more easily preserved throughout time. So the fact that this stuff from so long ago survived is kind of crazy, and survived in its entirety. In his works, Plato almost exclusively utilizes the technique of dialogue, which is, instead of writing a dissertation or just an essay, he is portraying this idea of two or more speakers talking to each other, having a conversation, and trying to learn by talking to each other and teasing out different aspects of whatever it is the subject of their philosophy was at the time. He rarely, if ever, uses his own voice in his dialogues, but typically uses the characters, and I say characters with like quotes of that are like other famous Greek figures, almost always Socrates, his teacher, in his dialogues. And typically, if Socrates is in one of his dialogues, whatever Plato's view is on a subject is going to be dictated by Socrates. Two of the most significant subjects that Plato addresses in his philosophy are the idea of forms and the immortality of the soul. And some of his most famous works are Apology, Phaedo, Republic, Symposium, and Laws. And his overall works can be classified in three periods: the early, middle, and late. And essentially, the early period is a lot less clear in like drawing conclusions. The middle period is considered more of his like classically studied stuff, and then the late period has a lot more like difficult ideas and concepts in the philosophy. That was a lot of just like the background. But it turns out we spoiled ourselves. Celine and I actually both picked like one of the same topics. I picked several things that I have read before, like in college, and one of them is the Allegory of the Cave from the Republic, and the other is like Symposium, just all of the dialogue Symposium, because it's not super long. You also picked Republic, the Allegory of the Cave.
Yes, I did.
Do you have anything you want to talk about before we get started? Like, I know I took a lot of philosophy classes in college, like in undergrad. I minored in religious studies, and so a lot of philosophy like counted in that. I think I've read Symposium, Phaedo, and parts of Republic, but honestly, I can't remember anything about Phaedo, so I didn't like talk about it when I was taking notes. I know you have said before that you have basically no formal background in philosophy, and so I was wondering, just like at the start, how you found this like exercise going through this.
Well, joke's on you. I actually am formally educated. I took one elective philosophy class in undergrad community college that I remember nothing of, which basically makes me an expert in philosophy.
Sorry, I didn't mean to like assume. I just didn't realize you had taken any philosophy.
Yes, I took one, I think it was philosophy. Now I'm saying it out loud. No, it was definitely philosophy. I was one of those people that I was like, I wanted to take philosophy and psychology in college once I had I went to community college first with the understanding that I would go to a 4-year college and just spend less money. And then I didn't do the second part, but I did the first part a couple of times. And the first time I did go to a philosophy class. I think I took a philosophy class, and I don't really remember anything about it. I do remember it was pretty civil. I don't remember any like real big arguments, and the professor was pretty chill. I don't remember like having any heated arguments against anything that he said, but I also don't remember being particularly challenged in my viewpoints either. So it was largely forgettable. But to actually answer your question, which was what did I do? I went to Wikipedia and I looked at Plato and I started reading, got bored, looked at the like big things that he did, like his most notable works, was like, ooh, I'll look at the soul, because that was the first thing that called to me. I always think it's very interesting. I'm pretty like, I don't know if the word is agnostic, but I'm like pretty neutral about religion. I don't have any personal firm beliefs in religion, but I also don't think anything negative. I think that religion is very important for humanity. I think that it can be I don't really think that everybody can or wants to deal with the idea that just life is meaningless and you get like 60 to 80 years if you're really lucky. And then for a majority of people on Earth, you die and then you're done. And in a couple 100 years, if that, maybe even 100 after you die, nobody will remember you and you never made an impact. And that is like, again, I don't like to talk about philosophy. This is kind of like how I was going to start my topic. I don't like to talk about philosophy a lot because I kind of have a bit of a doomer mindset of like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I've kind of accepted that I'm not like going to be remembered after I die, and that's not important to me anymore. It used to be. I think that most people that kind of have the same mindset that I do, which is like there is no afterlife. I don't believe in any particular religion. You know, when I die, I'm gone, and that's it. I think everybody kind of goes through a crisis when they kind of when that's the religious view that they choose to follow. They kind of have a a panic of life is pointless. Why am I doing any of this? Nobody's gonna remember me when I'm gone. What's the point of living? You know, that I think that's pretty normal. And then you just kind of realize that that isn't the point. Like being like I think that as a society, especially in the US, like legacy is very important in our uh, belief systems. You know, you have to have children because you have to have something that you left on this earth that's physical. You either need to cure cancer or have kids. You need to have something. And if you don't do either of those things, you know, which is something I'm never going to do, I'm never going to cure cancer and I'm never going to have any children. It's like, well, you failed as a human being. You didn't do your literal purpose for living, which is to continue the species.
It's so interesting that you say that because the idea of like leaving a legacy, either physically, literally through offspring or through your works, is an idea that comes back in Symposium. And I will talk about it at the end of my like topic. But it was just very interesting that you mentioned that because that is an idea that maybe didn't originate with Plato, but definitely is like codified in Symposium as like one of the thoughts about like humanity. And I just sorry to cut you off.
No, I was rambling.
Okay, I was just gonna say it's funny because I have a very similar belief system to you in that I also don't think anything happens to us when we die. I think it's just over. And I think that, and I'm not religious, and I also don't care if others are religious unless they are like harming people. Like if you're a Scientologist and you're watching this, like go away. But anyway,
I agree. I that was kind of the tangent that I was kind of leading back to, which is I also hold the similar belief that I think that there are people that need the comfort of either, even if it's something as simple as, you know, my soul goes on, and I'm able to watch over my children, or you know, my parents are watching over me, or I'm gonna get fluffy white wings and I'm gonna go to an idyllic world where I'm happy with my family and blah blah blah. You know, if people need that to feel like their life has meaning, I don't think anybody should take that away from them. It's not hurting anyone. And,
as
you know,
well, the caveat is as long as they are not actively hurting anyone, because there are a
correct.
lot of ways in which organized religion has harmed people over time, different, races, sexes, just cultures. So there are many ways in which that has harmed people. But I'm talking about, and you are talking about the most benevolent form of like religious belief, which is that which comforts someone and does not harm anyone else.
Yeah. I'm talking about the belief, not the practice of religion. I believe that
Right.
the belief of religion is fine. The practice of
Mhm.
religion generally is not.
Yeah. I was also going to say it's interesting that you and I have the same mind or have the same like paradigm for belief, but have very different mindsets as a result of it because you think life is meaningless. But I think the fact that there is nothing after death means that life is in itself its own meaning and it's experiential. And so you have to make of it what you will and live for yourself. There is also definitely an aspect that like is taken from like Platonic ideas and like humanist ideas. And for me, I thought that like I would like to leave something, creative as, an imprint of me behind on the world, whether that's short story, poetry, podcast, like branching out, or, whatever, like something that is will have made some sort of impact on someone else, even if it's just to make them happy for a little bit. And it's not even something that needs to like persist for hundreds of years after I'm gone. It's just something that like I would like to know that I made some sort of impact, which is also why, not to go off on too much of a tangent, why I do what I do for like my day job, which I'm not gonna like dox myself, but I will just say that like I work in a industry that is designed to like serve a very vulnerable population and has like a very real material impact on people who need services. So that's very important to me, like knowing that I help people is something I need in order to like feel good about what I'm doing. So,
Yeah, no, and it's not that my belief is wholly different from yours. I think I just express it a little bit differently, which is, I might say, oh, life is meaningless, but I just mean that, like, the legacy of life is meaningless. It's not about, I have to do all of these nice things in my life to make sure that I go to a better place when I'm dead.
mhm.
It's, I need to do nice things in my life so that the life that I am living is better, because you shouldn't, at least this is my opinion, obviously. Uh, I don't think that you should live your life only for the hope that you will get rewarded after you're gone. I feel like you should live your life with the hopes that, like, you will actively make either your life or other people's lives better in the now.
But speaking, and actually, it's interesting the way you framed that, because making other people's lives better in the now is actually like the core conceit of the purpose of the allegory of the cave. Because while it's literally talking about like the idea of forms, um, the purpose of the allegory is to explain to people and ostensibly, future philosopher kings or philosopher rulers why they should become highly educated and use that enlightenment to the betterment of their people. And so that is like the idea behind the allegory of the cave. And we'll dig into that.
That's interesting because that's not how I interpreted it at all. I, as usual, had a much more negative mindset than how you interpreted it. Well, to circle back, you asked me a question and I never actually finished answering it.
Oh, okay.
You asked me how I got to my topic, which was, to recap, Google, boredom, soul, started reading when I think I started writing something along the lines of, man, Plato couldn't figure out what the fuck he thought was going to happen after he died, because like he talked about the soul and how it lived on past the body, but then he started talking about reincarnation, and it was like, you can't make up your mind what you think happens to the soul, huh? And I kind of got, I don't remember. I think I just looked off to the left as I was writing, and something called The Allegory of the Cave, and I was like, sure, I'll read what this is. Read it, and I was like, ah, I know how I can ruin everybody's mindset about this. And but no, I actually like kind of resonated with it quite deeply, but in a way I don't think you are going to expect that I did, based on how you just described its intended purpose,
Mhm.
because like I said, I didn't think like that at all.
Do you want me to read parts of it?
Please, because I didn't. I heard a summary.
Okay. Okay. The start of book 7 of the Republic, that's where the allegory starts. And it is a
That's a
dialogue
lot of
between
books.
I think there's like, I don't know how many there are, but there's more than 10. It's a dialogue between Socrates and Glaucon. Glaucon? I'm not sure. I think it's Socrates' brother. Could be wrong. But anyway, basically the other person in the dialogue, his purpose is to kind of like be like, I see, and ask questions. And so, like, Socrates says, and now, I said, let me show in a figure how far our nature is enlightened or unenlightened. Behold, human beings living in an underground den, which has a mouth open towards the light and reaching all along the den. Here they have been from their childhood, and have their legs and necks chained so they cannot move, and can only see before them, being prevented by the chains from turning round their heads. Above and behind them is a fire blazing at a distance, and between the fire and the prisoners there is a raised way. And you will see, if you look, a low wall built along the way, like the screen which marionette players have in front of them, over which they show the puppets. Glaucon says, I see. And do you see, I said, men passing along the wall, carrying all sorts of vessels, and statues and figures of animals made of wood and stone and various materials, which appear over the wall. Some of them are talking, others silent. You have shown me a strange image, and they are strange prisoners. Like ourselves, I replied, and they see only their own shadows, or the shadows of one another, which the fire throws on the opposite wall of the cave. True, he said. How could they see anything but the shadows if they were never allowed to move their heads? And of the objects which are being carried in a like manner, they would only see the shadows? Yes, he said. And if they were able to converse with one another, would they not suppose that they were naming what was actually before them? Very true. And suppose further that the prison had an echo which came from the other side. Would they not be sure to fancy when one of the passers-by spoke that the voice which they heard came from the passing shadow? No question, he replied. To them, I said, the truth would be literally nothing but the shadows of the images. That is certain. And now look again, and see, and will naturally follow, if the prisoners are released and disabused of their error. At first, when any of them is liberated and compelled suddenly to stand up and turn his neck round, and walk and look towards the light, he will suffer sharp pains. The glare will distress him, and he will be unable to see the realities of which, in his former state, he had seen the shadows, and then conceive someone saying to him that what he saw before was an illusion, but that now, when he is approaching nearer to being, and his eye turned towards more real existence, he has a clearer vision. What will be his reply? And you may further imagine that his instructor is pointing to the objects as they pass and requiring him to name them. Will he not be perplexed? Will he not fancy that the shadows which he formerly saw are truer than the objects which are now shown to him? Far truer. And if he is compelled to look straight at the light, will he not have a pain in his eyes which will make him turn away to take in the objects of vision which he can see, and which he will conceive to be in reality clearer than the things which are now being shown to him? True. And suppose once more that he is reluctantly dragged up a steep and rugged ascent, and held fast until he's forced into the presence of the sun himself. Is he not likely to be pained and irritated? When he approaches the light, his eyes will be dazzled, and he will not be able to see anything at all of what are now called realities. Not all in a moment, he said. He will require to grow accustomed to the sight of the upper world, and first he will see the shadows best, next the reflections of men and other objects in the water, and then the objects themselves. Then he will gaze upon the light of the moon and the stars and the spangled heaven, and he will see the sky and the stars by night better than the sun or the light of the sun by day? Certainly. Last off, he will be able to see the sun, and not mere reflections of him in the water, but he will see his own proper place. He will see him in his own proper place, and not in another, and he will contemplate him as he is. Certainly. He will then proceed to argue that this is who he gives the season, that this is he who gives the season and the years, and is the guardian of all that is in the visible world, and in a certain way the cause of all things which he and his fellows have been accustomed to behold? Clearly, he said, he would first see the sun and then reason about him. And when he remembered his old habitation, and the wisdom of the den and his fellow prisoners, do you not suppose that he would felicitate himself on the change and pity them? Certainly, he would. And if they were in the habit of conferring honors among themselves on those who were the quickest to observe the passing shadows and to remark which of them went before, and which followed after, and which were together, and who were therefore best able to draw conclusions as to the future, do you think that he would care for such honors and glories, or envy the possessors of them? Would he not say with Homer, better to be the poor servant of a poor master, and to endure not anything, rather than think as they do, and live after their manner? Yes, he said, I think that he would rather suffer anything than entertain these false notions and live in this miserable manner. Imagine once more, I said, such as one coming suddenly out of the sun to be replaced in his old situation. Would he not be certain to have his eyes full of darkness? And so that is the idea of the allegory of the cave. And basically, you have both the visible and the intelligible realms. And the idea is that this is an allegory for like the education of a philosopher. And you go from seeing the shadows, which is the idea of imagination, to belief when you see the statues, which are more real than the shadows, which are just an impression of something that you can't see at the time. And then the forms, which are the actual ideal forms that the statues are patterned after and that you saw the shadows of initially. And then the form of good, which is the sun, that is the thing from which all of the goodness, truth, and light comes from and illuminates the forms so that we have an idea of what they are. There's a lot there, but this is all about like the idea of the forms. And this is where the term that I've said before is like the Platonic ideal. This is like that notion. And so basically, the concept means that every important aspect of our lives, from good and truth and light and honesty and like virtues and all the things that make up humanity and the world, essentially, there is an absolute and timeless essence of those things, and that is their true form. His assertion is that we don't actually learn about the forms because we can't sense them physically. Like, we can't see them, smell them, taste them, and understand them as they truly are because it's beyond the physical. But our souls knew the forms before they entered into our bodies. And so anything that we learn and comprehend is just us remembering things we knew before we were born.
That's not what I interpreted from that at all. So I'm excited to talk about the differences because I didn't allow myself to be like impressioned by what the point was supposed to be. I just was I read the summary and then decided on my own what I took from it. And it was, as usual, nothing like the artist intended.
I basically wanted to talk about what it meant and then see what you thought, and then we could get deeper into it.
So I know that Gull just went through a very lengthy and in-depth explanation as to what the allegory of the cave is. I'm going to explain it for 5-year-olds because that is my learning level. So how I understood it was essentially there are people chained in a cave and they see shadows of people on the wall in the firelight. They believe what they see is a representation of the world when it is in fact not. He says that the philosopher type is a person who escapes the cave and strives to understand the true nature of the world, where the prisoners, that even when free, choose not to leave the cave because it is the only life they have known.
That's true. That's all accurate.
Okay, cool. And I was interested in this philosophy because I think it can be applied to escapism in the modern world, and specifically how it applies to me and how I live my life. I
Okay.
curate my online and personal space as heavy as I can. I do not consume any outside media about global news or issues. I do not interact with people outside of my spaces very often. So it comes sometimes as a genuine shock to me when I encounter viewpoints that I don't agree with, such as heavy sexism, because it feels like, have we seriously not gotten over this by now? People still really think like this? And as an example, many, many, many years ago at this point, I do not remember when this happened. It feels like it was probably between anytime between 2008 and 2015 for me. Happened all in the same year, as far as I'm concerned. I can't differentiate when what happened when. But many, many years ago, there was an opportunity where an esports game, I think it was Heroes of the Storm, but I'm not sure, was played on ESPN2, which was like unheard of that an esports game would get played on like national television, even though it wasn't like, prime ESPN, it was ESPN2. It was still on syndicated television, which was huge, and I was so excited because I'm a nerd and I liked my esports. I was a huge esports like consumer back when like League of Legends and StarCraft 2 in like the 2008 to 2012 when it was like getting real big. And I was like super excited to see it on cable TV. And I remember going to check Twitter during when it happened and like reading the hashtag and stuff, to revel in the excitement with other people that enjoyed esports like I do. And the only thing that I remember from that is being so deflated because there were so many people bitching about why video games were on their sports channel. And it was like just seen as like an incredibly negative thing. And it made me realize how insulated my bubble had become. I only really interacted with people who had the same idea as me about video games. I hang out with gamers. Like I don't hang out with anybody who isn't a gamer and who doesn't like video games. So to
Gamers.
see that like outside perspective was quite jarring. And something very similar happened very recently. There was a big Twitter thread about a woman showing a clip of herself playing Valorant and a male in the game threatening to sexually assault her. And she put a cry to action to Riot to ask to ban these types of people, which seemed reasonable to me. You know, don't threaten to sexually assault people. Don't threaten anyone in general over a video game. That's my general philosophy. And most people that I choose to hang out with kind of hold that philosophy because I'm not going to hang out with men or women who are rude to me because of my gender. Why would I entertain that? So I really don't deal with sexism hardly ever because, like, and if I do, it's a random person that I can just be like, well, that person's a fucking idiot. They're probably 12. And I just, like, I block them or I mute them in whatever game I'm playing or whatever. And I never go into voice channels. And that's like a bigger, I do not reveal myself as a woman. I never go into voice channels because I don't want to experience things like that. So I actively choose to be the prisoner in the cave. I don't go to see what the outside world is actually like because I don't want to. To continue, sorry. And you would think that, the message would be positive, but it turns out this woman got severely bashed in Twitter comments from men mainly, but there were some women in there too, I imagine, that basically said that women shouldn't be playing video games, that women want to be treated equal and put into an equal space, but then want the men around them to change to adapt to their soft sensibilities.
Well, I just want to say that the premise of that argument is completely invalid because how often do you have men threatening to sexually assault other men because they think they're bad at a game? That's not how they interact. They call them gay, they call them like, all kinds of stuff like that, but like I don't think they threaten to sexually assault them.
I don't know. I'm not a man. I was going to say that apparently that's a lot of people who were, having that viewpoint say that that's very normal, like, to do. And which, like, that may be true because, again, we kind of surround ourselves with what we want to be surrounded with. And so you tend to, if you are a toxic person, the only people that are going to tolerate you are other toxic people. And our mindsets, especially in this kind of like world of information and like group think, tend to kind of perpetuate themselves. All of this to say is that it made me wonder if being the prisoner is really such a bad thing. I know to Plato it was. He always wanted, he always thought that it was better to see the world for what it really was rather than to live in ignorance. But I don't know if I agree. I would personally rather live in ignorance and happiness than know all of the horrible viewpoints and opinions that people have and have to be subjected to them. I curate my Twitter to only hold cat videos and anime titties. I curate my communities to bring positivity to myself and others. This week, I was finally able to delete a reaction video that had a really just toxic comment section because I didn't understand the community I was stepping into. And the comment section for that video was honestly just kind of horrible. People said to me unironically that I deserved to be cheated on for my controversial view of Check's notes, not wanting to call women whores. I don't need that negativity in my life, so sorry, Plato mate, you can be the philosopher. I'll happily be the prisoner playing with my shadow puppets.
What's interesting is I don't think, and I think that Plato would not think, that you are actually the prisoner in this situation. I think he would say you are the person who has achieved the like philosophical understanding and refused to return to be the philosopher king that the people need. And so like the rest of that book in Republic and the whole of Republic is about how just and good governments, societies should be organized and ruled or led. And the rest of that particular book goes on to talk about how, the person, even though the person who has come out of the cave and seen the sun would hate to go back to the cave, it's their duty to go back and to help illuminate the lives of others. And this is directly, correlated to his view of politics and how like the philosopher king should be wise, understanding, and fair in his rulership and, bestow that wisdom upon the masses. And so he would say, you understand truths about our society and have chosen to eschew dealing with them instead of trying to make anything better, which I don't think he would blame you for.
It's true though. I absolutely agree with that sentiment that I've battled with whether or not I wanted to talk about this or not, but I feel like it's relevant to that specific point that you just made. I absolutely hold the mindset of like, there is a particularly nasty conflict going on in the world right now. And I will be completely honest, I choose not to consume information and media about it. It just makes me upset. And I have a very high escapism lifestyle. Like I said, I don't consume media in the form of news of any kind The only like times I really hear about like big things happening is if somebody else physically tells me, or if I happen to run across it being retweeted on Twitter. But that's also very rare. And the conflict is quite fierce right now. And on Twitter, there's a lot of guilt posting and a lot of shock posting. You know, people will show people in the midst of dying as like a, hey, this is happening, you should be doing something. And as much as I empathize with what is happening, I am of the personal belief that it's Plato would have said to me if he were here right now. I have chosen not to make the world better, which is true. I have chosen. I'm quite a selfish person after not being selfish for a very long time, and I don't. I could do more and choose not to, and curate my spaces to like reflect that. So I agree. I have seen the horrors of the world and have chosen to do nothing about it and instead live in ignorance. And I don't think that that's bad, because kind of my whole point was that I feel like there are powers in the world, such as, you know, $1 trillion owning governments and world powers and militaries that could do something that choose not to, and that's on them. And I don't think that's on we were talking about recycling today, where we had a little cardboard box and I was like, do you want to recycle this? And you were like, no. It's, if corporations are going to pour billions of tons of trash into the ocean, what's this little cardboard box going to do? It's not our responsibility as consumers and as the masses to fix a problem that a few small people are doing just because they say that it will help. You know, I think it's a very, it's a thing that happens in the world on so many different fronts and levels and places where big corporations and, you know, people of actual influence and power are not expected to do anything, but the people who don't have the power are guilted into doing, you know, things that are harder on them than should be, just because they choose not to help. And that sucks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Plato would agree with you that in this situation, the person or the group, the philosopher king with the responsibility to go back into the cave with the knowledge of the forms are these corporations, are these governments, are these leaders, these world powers that have the resources and influence to do things for the greater good, but either through greed or mismanagement or just their own selfishness choose not to. And so I think he absolutely would agree. And like there's something to be said about like the scale of our societies in like a global sense is not something that he could have conceived of from the,
Mm-hmm.
5th century BC. But I think he would be horrified to know that like there are people with the amount of power and influence and reach in our world who are so highly educated and they choose to use that education and that voice and that platform to take money from corporations to, serve their own self-interest to get reelected. And this is definitely with a US bent as I'm talking. I'm sure it can be applied to other places throughout the world, but like we are both from the US, so like that is what we know the best. So that is, if that doesn't apply to where you are, just know that we're talking about where we live. Like, I think that would be horrifying to him because there's a level of information sharing going on and like a capacity for wisdom and understanding because we can draw from so many sources across the ages, across cultures, and things are not being done in a way that he would view as being like the form of good.
But I think he might also be, I don't know how proud of a man that he was, but the fact that even though he couldn't have seen the scope of the world as it is, to know that his ideas and philosophies could be tangentially, you know, attributed to like my little life, where I'm just like, ah, yeah, the problem in the cave. Yeah, I see that with, you know, choosing not to engage with, you know, opposite opinion groups on Twitter.
Mm.
My Twitter is the cave. I choose never to leave it.
And see, I don't think he would hold individuals to blame for things like that because they don't have the power and the reach and the influence to do the things that like are expected of these philosopher kings. I think he would find it admirable that you are someone who was in the cave and came out of it and understands some of the truths of the world, and would also find it completely understandable that you're like, oh, fuck that, that's horrible. Like, I don't want to know more because what can I do about it? And that's, I think, what it boils down to, like applying philosophy to like action and the real world. It's like, what can you do about it? And he was talking to people who would be leaders and like have the power, and like unfortunately we do not.
Yeah, and I also, it's not even entirely like, what can I do about it? It kind of cycles back to what I was talking about originally with knowing that there isn't going to be an after really makes me think about my present a lot, and how, because I don't believe that there's like the golden gates or whatever, fluffy wings waiting for me with a perfect afterlife, I have to make happiness in my life right now. And it's not gonna be from, it's why I don't engage with negativity on Twitter even when I see it. There have definitely been times where I'm like, I feel like I should tweet about this, I have an opinion, and then I sit and I think about it and it's like, all right, is this person mindset likely to change? No. Is the only thing that's really going to come out of this my own annoyance? Yes. So should I do it? No. Because
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately the thing with, usually with philosophy and politics and ideals, is that people believe what they are going to believe and they are not going to change how they believe. So unfortunately, as much as I wish that it was just, and for some people it is, you know, some people are reasonable and they just need one good argument to be like, huh, yeah, kinda. And just like, I wish that sexism in every person was one stern talking to from being resolved, but you know, for some people it is, you know, there are some people that have that life-changing moment where they see something or hear something or someone makes a point and they're like, wow, you're right. And then, you know, there are people who are just sexist for their entire life and it doesn't matter what you say or do. It's just how they are. And that gets into the whole idea on if people are capable of change. Just a whole bunch of like doomer that I'm not gonna go into, but like,
It's interesting that your last point was about um sexism and you know, how men and women are treated differently, because Symposium has a lot of those themes in that dialogue. And so Symposium is something that I had read when I was in college. I don't think I read all of it. Like, I don't think we were required to read all of it. I definitely remember reading the part about like the two halves of the whole soul, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea behind Symposium is there's a gathering at fuck, I don't remember his name. Antiphon? That's not his name. Do I have it in my notes? Probably not, because he wasn't that important. He's just the guy hosting. He was a tragedian. He was a dramatist who wrote something, and they were celebrating his victory at the recent event that was to celebrate Dionysus. And, you know, he wrote a tragedy and was celebrated, and he won. So, anyway, it's a bunch of, like, you know, important Greek dudes, and Socrates was invited to this symposium, which is a I heard it described in one like summary as like drinking party. Basically, it was an idea that you were going to be having. There's two parts to a symposium. It's the meal, which is not particularly regimented, and then it is the drinking part, where there's literally someone who's in charge of like deciding how much you're gonna drink, and then like serving people, and like you are, expected to be seated on these couches, two to a couch, and they will be arranged so that you can have conversation amongst yourselves, and there's a certain aspect of like ceremony to it. But anyway, the whole dialogue in Symposium is about the nature of love, and everyone goes around giving speeches to honor the idea or the god love. And there's a lot of discussions throughout this about love between men and men and love between women and men. And they're also part of like the frame story. Like there's mention of like the fact that no women were allowed at the symposium, and like the flute girl was sent away to like not be playing the flute, but to go uh, hang out with the women inside the house, because they wanted to talk serious talk. And so like the reason I think that Plato you know makes this like very clear delineation at the beginning becomes a lot more obvious at the end when Socrates gives his argument, because it involves the words of a probably fictional woman who had taught him the true reason or understanding of love. And so basically, there are a lot of discussions. And one of the first ones is about the difference between common or vulgar love and heavenly love. And that comes from the fact that both Hesiod and Homer, who were both, historians, had different stories on the origins of Aphrodite. There were two different ideas of Aphrodite. There was Aphrodite Pandemos and Aphrodite Urania. And basically, one came from the body of Uranus, and the other came from the like physical union of Zeus and Dione. So like the idea that the one that involves sex is more common and vulgar, and the one that didn't involve sex is, heavenly or whatever. There's the distinction of like types of love, and the idea persists throughout all of the arguments that, love that is for the purposes of sexual gratification is more coarse or vulgar compared to love that is for the purpose of like understanding and like mutual respect and wisdom and stuff like that. There's also discussion of the nature of these relationships that like especially Athenian Greeks would have between like an older man and like essentially a protege, like a younger young man who had been through puberty definitely, but was like younger than whoever the lover was. Um, and so it's interesting because like it's not like homosexuality in like the way that we understand it today. It was something that they were talking about like as being a more pure relationship and type of love that was about like nurturing, teaching, and I mean there's definitely like a physical component to it. They talk about that in Symposium, but the idea is not to like take advantage of the younger person, but to through your relationship teach and uplift and convey like the purity of your love. And so this they talk about an example of this is Achilles and Patroclus. And Achilles knew because his mother had told him that it was prophesied that if he killed Hector, he himself would die. And despite this, the love that he bore for Patroclus, who was killed in his name by Hector, he was like, I'm going to avenge him. And he did die. And so, they talk about heralding this and how that love is, greater than any love that could be had for a wife or women. And it's worth noting that in Greek society at the time, the sexes were very stratified. Like women were not given the opportunity to be educated or to hold property or to vote or anything like that. They were essentially like put in the place of childbearing and like household upholding, and they were not given the opportunity to do much more than that except in very rare circumstances. And so in Symposium, these like other characters who are not Socrates and therefore not Plato's perspective, um, talk about how like um, they're kind of dismissive about how the love between man and woman is, and how it's like more vulgar or not as significant or not as able to be like full of logic and reason as love between men is. So, I mean, obviously that is like a product of their time. And although what you have mentioned before, talking about like sexism in the here and now, clearly some men still would agree with that like idea that like women are irrational.
Or women in their tits are always like distracting men from taking them away from their boys.
But yeah, so the idea here is that love through virtue and wisdom rather than sexual gratification um is the true ideal of love. And what the ultimate argument that comes down to like the winning argument at the Symposium is the one that Socrates gives. And Socrates himself owes his argument, and he says he owes his argument to a woman called Diotima, who taught him the true nature of love. And so this it takes a dialogue format in itself as well, and he recounts what she had said to him. And so according to her, love was not a god, and it was also not immortal, but was something in between, a spirit that would mediate between humans and the objects of their desire. And so love was not wise or beautiful, but is the desire for those things. And it's expressed through, like, she specifically talks about like pregnancy and offspring, which is interesting because it's a very, you know, female oriented idea in a conversation that had previously discounted women entirely. And this is definitely not an accident because, you know, Plato is very good at like constructing his arguments and constructing his dialogues. So this was an intentional choice on his part. He or she says the greatest knowledge is knowledge of the form of beauty, which humans must try to achieve, and beauty is the eternal philosopher because it is the lover of wisdom, which, as we said before at the top of the discussion, philosophy is literally in its root words the love of wisdom. So she says that beauty is not the end, but the means to an end, and that is the means is reproduction and birth, either literal birth of offspring or figurative in the form of creative works, in the form of art, in the form of philosophy, in the form of teachings, in the form of anything that is of cultural significance that will live beyond the human life. In conclusion, Diotima advises Socrates on how a young man, should be brought up from a young age to understand love. So first, he should start by loving a particular body that he finds beautiful, because that's the most simple. Like, you point a boy at someone he finds attractive, and then the second step is, as time goes by, he will learn that, like, you know, simple passion is not all there is, and he will come to love more than just one body, but, you know, other people as well. And then he will pass from the love of bodies to beautiful minds, and then to knowledge itself, which is, you know, the essential component of those beautiful minds. That kind of progression is mirroring the idea of the forms that we saw in the Republic's allegory of the cave. You go from imagination, which is, you know, correlated to loving one body, to belief, which is all bodies or more than one body, to understanding of the forms, which is, loving beautiful minds, to loving the thing that illuminates and allows the forms to exist, which is the form of beauty, the form of love. And so this whole concept is where the idea of platonic love comes from. So you have both the platonic ideal and and platonic love that we have discussed so far in this podcast. But the idea is love that is greater than friendship, but is not consisting of like base desire, is like the platonic ideal of love. I think symposium is kind of a little confusing because there's a lot of different viewpoints that are like tackled throughout the whole thing. But I think ultimately it's just another way that he is trying to like explain his idea of the forms and how there is one thing above all, which is the form of love, or the form of beauty that, sheds its light, informs how humans understand love and beauty and knowledge and all those kinds of things. And you have to see beyond the physical and the tangible in order to truly understand and like love somebody or something, or the very idea of knowledge itself.
Kind of what I took away from all of that was it kind of reminded me of what my, I think, pretty unique view of love and relationships is. Which it kind of follows the flow of kind of what Plato was saying. I have never met anybody that believes the same way that I do about relationships, which is I do not think that humans are life partner animals. There are very few animals in the world that are, and they are, no offense, doves and other creatures that are life partner animals. They're usually a lot more short-lived in terms of time, and also they just don't have the straight up higher brain function that humans do. Again, no, sorry, doves, my bad. I don't. We are a species due to our way of thinking, an ability to think critically and expansively, that who we are and how we think consistently and continuously changes throughout our lives. New experiences teach us new things, who and how we thought 5 years ago, 10 years ago, is not going to be the same as who you are and how you think as you get older. Your needs change, which was kind of what Plato was saying, which is when you're 15, 16 years old, you're just thinking about sex. That's all you want. It's all about physical, body, body, body. That's what you want. But once you get into your 30s, you start thinking about long-term plans of, what do I actually want and need in a partner, and how do I find that? And then, once you get even older than that, it changes to potentially like, who am I going to end my life with? How am I going to end my life? And things of that nature. And since each individual human, we grow, like the same way with friendships, you can grow apart from people that you were friends with when you were a kid because their personalities just grew in a way that yours didn't. Some people grow up to be like, stay kind of immature for a little bit longer, and the mature friends tend to be like, I don't really like hanging out with you anymore, dude. You're not as funny as I thought you were when I was, younger. Because I just don't hold the immature mindset anymore, per se. I think that who we need at 16 is different than who we need at 25, than who we need at 40, than who we need at 70, Like, we just change too much. We're too veritable as people based on the experiences that we have in our lives, like how we deal with stress. And there are some people that manage to, and I don't think, and there are some people that will make the argument that there are still people that meet someone at 16 in high school and their high school sweethearts and they stay together for their whole lives. And I think that is much more an exemption than it is a reality for most people, because there is the chance that people will grow together and end up needing and changing into what the other partner ends up needing later. But I don't think that that is usually how it happens. You know, the chance of you changing and still being the type of person that the other person needs, and them changing and also still being what you need for 70 years is just very unlikely. And also, since we have our higher brain function, I think we just need more stimulation. And I think we're multiple partner animals. Like, I just think that we are. And I think that that philosophy kind of agrees with that, which is you're always looking for more like brain stimulation versus like physical stimulation as you get older, because
Mm-hmm.
your needs change over time. And I mean, I think it's been pretty much proven that if you marry someone because they're hot when you're younger, we don't stay hot forever. And once that like physical attraction is gone, you start looking for like like not personal attraction, but like just interest in the brain and the
Mm-hmm.
conversation and stuff like that.
I agree with a lot of what you said, but um I think that the idea of this progression of like understanding and like desire for love in its purest form is not something that Plato would say is inherent to age. If you are able to like truly study and learn and grasp this concept at a younger age, like, you know, 18, 20, 25, whatever, it's something that you could search for in a partner instead of just a physical relationship at an earlier time. And in fact, I think that is his intention for what you should do. And that is not to say he doesn't in any way say, because it is still discussed that like an important thing is offspring. So like either physical or, you know, creative, philosophical offspring. He doesn't say never have sex and sex is bad and you'll die like in Mean
Mean
Girls
Girls.
and the coach. Yeah. What he says is if all you are pursuing is physical gratification, you are never going to understand what love is supposed to be at its truest form. And so his idea is if you are pursuing a higher form of love, which goes beyond the physical, which goes beyond what someone looks like, how they are in bed, how you interact with them on a very basic level, and is something that is more about like being oriented towards um how they are as a partner in like the truest sense of the word, like how you would be able to handle difficult situations together. Do you have the same sort of ideals? Do you have the same sort of goals for life? And you know, that's something that you and I have like talked about. Like, you have said that you don't think you will ever have another romantic relationship in your life because of the way that like things have unfolded for you previously. You understand the need for companionship and the need to not be alone, which is, you know, inherent to humanity. And I don't think what he is saying is, you know, incompatible with that. In fact, I think he would celebrate that viewpoint and say, you know, if you can find a love with a person that is not necessarily inherently romantic, but in deeper understanding, you could find someone that would be a partner for life. It just wouldn't necessarily be, you know, the life partner that our typical, you know, Western American society thinks, which is like you have to marry for love and then you have to be in love forever. And like, I believe what you're saying is true to a certain extent. Like, I think it's very difficult in our modern society for a lot of people to not cheat or not want something else or not get bored. I think I think our society rewards instant gratification and short attention spans, and social media has a lot to do with that. So we're kind of being trained to not think of the long term. Um,
I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think I agree with that. I don't like the argument of saying that, oh, social media has lowered our attention span. I think we just have more access to information than we ever did. And you, like before, you had a village of 10 people, and half of them were too old for you, and half of them were too young for you. And the people that were with, like, everybody was fucking their neighbors anyway. So it's like, it's not that, oh, it's so much harder. It's like, we have the information that we didn't have before. Because it was so much easier to get away with, like, cheating on people when it was just 4 people in the village and everybody was sleeping with everybody else. And I feel like everybody knew about it, but just nobody cared. Because, like, and so I don't like the argument that it's like, oh, social media has, like, given us shorter attention spans and has negatively impacted us in that way. I think it's just that we have copious amounts of information about how not only we live our lives, but how everybody else feels and is living their life that we didn't have before. So it's not a fair comparison to, like, say, oh, we're so much different than we were in the 1700s because, social media has blah, 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 blah. Like, people cheat more than they ever did before. And it's like, no, I think we just know about it more because it's easier to catch people because we have cameras and, like, AirPods.
maybe I didn't represent what I meant well enough, but like I don't think that humans are fundamentally different than they were
No,
in the
I know you
17th
don't.
century or even 5th century BC. Like I think humans for like the, existence of written history are pretty much the same in terms of like how we think, how we feel, how we interpret the world around us. It's just the technology level that we have to experience the world is a lot higher, so we can experience more of it potentially. But I do think that because we have not changed, Plato would still say if you are pursuing a type of love that is more basic and physical and isn't, in pursuit of the wisdom of love and the true nature of love, you're gonna be disappointed in the end. And I think that is definitely something that like has always been missing because that's not in the animal nature of what it means to be like a mammal. Because like we want to copulate, we want to reproduce, like that's just the animal instinct. And I know that like some people are asexual and whatever, but like I mean just as a species, like that's what we're interested in doing.
I think that it has been very interesting that as a species, we have interconnected love with procreation. I find it just very interesting that, like, we decided essentially as a species that in order to reproduce, love has to be involved in some way. And so I think it's probably because, and I'm not a fucking biologist or anything, but it probably has something to do with the fact that our offspring takes so long and requires so much in order to, especially in the society we have now, in order to be essentially functioning. We're not like other animals where, you just birth out a calf and the calf exists, and
Like
if a,
walk.
if a wolf
Yeah.
comes along and eats the calf, oh fucking well. And if it doesn't, then good job. You have done what you needed to do. You are alive and you exist, and that's it. Eat grass. That's your life. That's your purpose. Whereas humans, we need to do a whole lot more to be considered, valuable members of our species.
Mhm.
But so like I understand why, and you know, we also kind of need like love and affection from our parents. So like maybe
Mhm.
that's why we as like a species decided that like mom and dad have to love each other in order to like procreate and make another baby and like make another, you know, generation of the species, when really no other animal is like that. Like I mean, there are just straight up some animals that just like, you know, mom lays eggs in a bush and dad comes and what's the word? I was gonna say germinates, but I'm like that's plants. But essentially,
Um, yeah.
germinates on the eggs, and then when you hatch, good luck. You never meet mom and dad, but those are also fish and like insects and stuff, so it's not the
And
same. You can't
turtles,
compare,
yeah.
but yeah, it's just it's always been yeah very interesting as a species how we have determined that love is interconnected to procreation, and thus we have to essentially make excuses in order to like have long lasting relationships and stay together when like I mean I would genuinely be curious of if there was really because you know you were talking about what Plato's views were about like how physical love can't last forever, and I'm like and isn't like fulfilling, and I'm like is there anyone who disagrees with that? Like that just seems like a known thing.
I think there are some people who think that you have to have a, active sexual relationship with your one partner that you're married to for the rest of your life, and it has to maintain the same like level of like the same cadence and whatever forever in order to make sure that you both are happy. But like I think that's not realistic.
But that's not what Plato is saying. He is saying that if you only attribute physical appearance to love, you will be unhappy. Which I feel like no one disagrees with that. So is it really a philosophy?
I think that part of the issue here is like what kind of love they are talking about, because there were numerous words that meant love. And so we're reading this in English, and so it's translated. I think he is more talking about the difference between like love as lust and attraction versus love as like deeper understanding between people. And some people think that the only thing there is to love is the romantic aspects of love, and that and physical attraction is bundled up in that. And he is saying that romantic attraction can be part of love, but it cannot be the only thing that love is predicated upon. And like in our society, like think about like Hallmark movies and like rom-coms. Like there is a big, idea that like if you are able to make the biggest romantic gesture and prove yourself to your prospective partner that like you are worthy of that love. And it doesn't really necessarily get deeper than that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. But also, movies are not meant to be representations of real life, it's fantasy. So anybody who. And this is coming as someone who, like, absolutely understands that they have been wrecked by media portraying impossible relationships and love, and not even impossible, just unrealistic. Absolutely. Like, when you're a teenage girl, you're never thinking about, so many like very deep looking relationships start from like experience of similar tragedy. You know, that's a very common thing to get people to fall in love with each other is like, the disaster movie that, brings two people together and then they kiss and it's all romantic, but then you think they don't really mesh. Like I think the biggest like form of that actually is and this is going to sound stupid, the newest Jurassic Park movies. The very first Jurassic Park movie, Chris Pratt's character and what's her name? I don't know. The he was a dinosaur trainer and she was a corporate CEO type, and they obviously had very different like ideals and views. But they had a fucking dinosaur outbreak, and so they came together to try to save the world, and they kissed and everything was great. But then you go into the sequel and they're like, yeah, we weren't anything alike and didn't agree with each other in our views, so we fucking broke up. And it's like, yeah, that's like how 99.9% of like every bit of media that involved romance would likely actually happen if you continued beyond the movie. But that's not the point of the movie per se. But I guess my point was that we absolutely kind of like romanticize the initial like the honeymoon phase. Like that's the part that is focused on in media, because that's usually the part of a relationship that is the strongest and thus the easiest to write as well. And then surviving past the honeymoon phase is like the hard part. So either they focus on the will they, won't they, or the honeymoon phase, and then they just kind of end so that you don't have to explain these things.
Something that, Plato would argue that if you had been thinking deeper about what a relationship was going to be like, you wouldn't have run into that issue in the first place. And so that's his whole argument.
That's where he learns I don't think about nothing.
What are you doing this week?
Sneezing.
Oh, sneezing.
Wait, hold on. Maybe I'm not. Got canceled. Okay. Apparently, I'm not sneezing. I thought I was. God, what am I doing this week? I mean, other than streaming, I have the big ASMR project that I'm trying to get finished. Gull and I write a big old, sometimes big. This one's real big. Like novels, like short story novella. That an erotica novelette. It's not a novel. It's a short story.
It is a big old short story, though.
Yeah, this week's very big. The raw footage for the short story recording was almost 2 hours, and the ASMR was almost 40 minutes, and that was me taking no breaks to get through it quite quickly. So I'm basically, I've got 4 days to edit both that and this podcast and the ASMR to get it out by, 3 days, to get it out by June 31st. There are 31 days in June, right? There's only 30, isn't there? Oh
Yeah.
no. Oh no, I've got 2 days.
No.
Well, guess that's what I'm gonna be doing. Gotta be doing some crunch to get that out. I thought I had 1 extra day. I do not. Other than that, got a couple of things that were funded through Throne this week. I'm gonna get some bunny ears, and I'm turning into an egg. I'm gonna go bald, and I'm getting glasses so I can put on my smart person glasses like Gull sometime soon for this podcast and pretend like I'm a smart person. But other than that, it's really just going to be streaming and a lot of editing to get done. What about you? What are you doing this week?
Thinking?
You have in-person D&D on Sunday?
That's true. I do have in-person D&D on Sunday. I'm hoping to have a talk with a wizard.
I have to bake brownies tomorrow.
No, you have to bake brownies Saturday.
I have to bake brownies on Saturday, which is apparently not tomorrow.
No, today is Thursday.
Yes. Thank you.
I'm just, trying to balance my life because I'm like, I'm doing a lot of creative things. Like I'm writing ASMR, I'm drawing, I'm, hanging out on stream. I'm trying to find time to stream on my channel instead of just being a, VTuber who appears on Celine's channel. But so far, recently, that's kind of what I've been. Because I want to justify to the people who have subscribed to me the fact that they're subscribed to me. But
they do it for the emotes.
Yeah.
Go Screech.
I just still feel bad.
Nah.
Go Screech. Yeah. So mostly I'm just like trying to chill when I can and figure things out. And I'm writing a lot of ASMR scripts. I drew something cool this week.
Oh yeah,
It's
the
sexy yoga art.
Mm-hmm. I love that art. Like, not to plug the Patreon or anything right now, but that art, I like every week you give me art, and I'm like, this is the best thing that she's ever drawn because you've been trying out a new anime style. Your original style was very realism,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't, like I said, I don't know if you will ever get to like quote unquote true anime style because it requires a lot of like rendering, specific rendering, and it like a color palette that you're also not like too keen on. But I don't think that you need to. But just like the
Mm-hmm.
difference in the lines and stuff has, in like the way that you like, don't give me a full nose, you know, as just a little line, in the
Mm-hmm.
lips and everything changes a lot. And that art was fire. It is great. So you're gonna have to do something real big to top it next week.
Oh, geez. The pressure.
You've been killing it with the ASMR scripts.
This is the part of the podcast where we say we're going to be talking about Area 51 next week. And I say, fuck, what is it that I say? Um, we gotta keep learning.
I've been Celine Whitetail,
And I've been Gull the Cactus.
and we are really bad at this. Follow us on all of our social medias. They'll be linked in places. I'm Celine Whitetail, basically everywhere.
And I'm at Gull the Cactus everywhere. I forgot, we had kind of a mailbag. Just real quick, as a note on the previous episode about Animal Crossing, I received a note from a listener who said, random thought that popped into my head after finishing the Animal Crossing podcast. You mentioned the Zodiac being animals and the townsfolk being like anthropomorphic. Technically, Gemini is a pair of humans, so I think it works out. I suppose you could argue it's also a pair of peacocks or goats, but I think it counts, lol. And I did the research of looking at the JPEG for the Gemini closet, which is the Gemini zodiac item, and it does in fact have a depiction of a pair of humans on it. So myth busted or whatever from what I said during the podcast. So that is the kind of thing, like, if you have comments and you have thoughts about what we have talked about during this podcast, please let us know. We would love to hear. Because, like, as long as you're not like, oh, you guys are so stupid, got this wrong, blah, blah, blah. If you have something, like, that you want to add or discuss or, gently correct, if, that sort of, that as an example, like, that's the kind of thing that we welcome and love, and we want to create discussion and we want to generate thought, because the whole purpose of this podcast is to think things that we have not thought before. So
Wait, which one of us was wrong?
I was
What did you say?
talking about how, like, one of the implications, and I was being facetious anyway, but one of the implications about Celeste having the zodiac items was weird because the people are animals, and like, but humans made up the zodiac to be like representations of animals as like aspects of humanity. But Gemini is literally two humans. And I think Virgo is also just a lady. So now that I think about it. But
Yeah, Libra is just a set of scales, so what animal is that?
yeah, but so it was just like the fact that humans and animals were represented in the zodiac, so that doesn't necessarily make it weird that in this world where humans and animals are both sentient creatures, it would, be that. So
Gotcha. All right. Bye, everybody.
bye.
Mwah.